We'll be starting our ride today from the Hamilton Willard Schaefer Farm. This was General Franklin's headquarters during the Battle of Cramptons Gap, and the home had fallen into terrible disrepair, but through the efforts of the Burkittsville Preservation Association, and in particular Paul J. Gilligan, they have restored this home to just magnificent shape. The commanders of the two armies at the Battle of Cramptons Gap were Major General Lafayette McLaws for the Confederates and Major General William Franklin for the Union. McLaws had a strength of 8,000 men, while Franklin commanded 12,800. When McLaws reached Burkittsville, he turned left on what's now Route 17 and proceeded down to Brownsville Pass Road. He used Brownsville Pass to get over the mountain because it was a much less strenuous march. When he reached the other side in Pleasant Valley, he formed his troops up and waited in anticipation for Franklin to do the same thing. But Franklin chose a different route. Upon arriving in Burkittsville, General Franklin did not do what McLaws had expected him to do. He did not follow him up the Brownsville Pass, but instead deployed his entire corps to the right of Burkittsville at the base of South Mountain. As I said at the beginning of the video, we'll be starting our ride at the newly restored Schaefer Farm, which was Major General Franklin's headquarters during the Battle of Cramptons Gap. Every time I ride by the old house, I am still amazed at how good it looks. The farm is located at the intersection of Gaplin Road and Catholic Church Road in Frederick County, Maryland. It's a beautiful early spring morning. The fields are already turned green and the trees are beginning to leaf out. As we proceed along Gaplin Road towards Burkittsville, you may notice a lack of development. As a matter of fact, if you took away the telephone, power poles, telephone lines, asphalt pavement, and automobiles, the area would appear much as it did to Franklin and his men on their way to the Gap. Today, it's hard to imagine this peaceful agrarian community hosting upwards of 14,000 armed men trampling crops, foraging for food and water, and camp firewood. It must have put a strain on the local resources and the nerves of the local inhabitants, which brings us to our next point of interest. Located at the crest of this hill on the right is what was the Distillery Lane Cider Works, which I now understand has been closed. But at the time of the battle, its field served as a bivouac area for Union troops awaiting orders to advance. We're now approaching the town of Burkittsville, as you can see from the roadside marker. Visiting Burkittsville is like taking a step back in time. A great many of the homes are pre-Civil War and have been carefully restored and preserved. Of course, you will notice that all the homes are not original to that time as we continue down Gaplin Road and West Main Street. As you can see, the homes on our right are of modern construction, and many of the homes in the center of town appear to be from the early 20th century. I'm now going to read to you a portion from the maryland.gov/history website about Burkittsville, Maryland. In 1810, Henry Burkett bought a part of the Maryland tract that has been granted to the family of Governor Thomas S. Lee before the Revolutionary War. Soon a village grew on parts of the Burkett and Harley properties at the intersection of two well-traveled roads. Joshua Harley opened a store about 1820 and in 1824 became the first postmaster of the village, which at that time was called Harley's Post Office. In 1829, Henry Burkett commissioned a survey of his land and platted what was to become the town that bears his name, with many of the trades of the times being housed in the structures that were built. Religion played an important role in early rural American history, demonstrated by the two stately churches on our right. At the intersection of Maryland Route 17, or Burkittsville Road, take notice of the yellow building on the left. That is the Paul J. Gilligan Dry Goods and Mercantile Company, where you can purchase unique items from antiques to reenactor accessories, but the store is only open on weekends. I'm not sure whether the Union troops used Gaplin Road to march to their pre-assault positions located at the base of South Mountain, or trudged through the neighboring fields. The armies usually used roads due to its requiring much less effort to march on a smooth surface rather than over rough, overgrown terrain. If they did so, it must have been quite a spectacle for whoever witnessed upwards of 8,000 armed men marching through this tiny town. As we leave Burkittsville, we'll begin the uphill ascent to the top of South Mountain on Gaplin Road, which did exist at the time of the battle. Turning onto Mountain Church Road, we'll soon come to the area where the Union regiments formed up to assault the mountain at Cramptons Gap. Now comes the part I don't understand. Two roads led to the top of the gap, Gaplin Road and Arnoldtown Road. Franklin ignored both routes and instead decided to attack a nearly vertical rocky section of the mountain. If you should visit this battlefield, keep in mind that all the land on both sides of Mountain Church Road is privately held and the locals may or may not be tolerant of sightseers. That being said, there really isn't much to see other than some beautiful countryside. There are no interpretive plaques or hiking trails at the base of the mountain for you to visit. I'm now going to read you a portion from one of the wayside markers at the top of the gap that better explains the battle progression than I could. Bartlett deployed to 27th New York as skirmishers, followed by the 5th Maine and 16th New York at 4:30 p.m. The troops moved across the field to a stone wall bordering the Forest Farm, about 250 yards from the Confederate line. Knowing his men could not hold that position long before exhausting their ammunition, Bartlett rode back to find Newton's brigade and ordered them up as replacements. Franklin then ordered Major General William F. Baldy Smith to anchor the left of the Federal line by placing a brigade south on the road. Smith sent the Vermont Brigade forward at nearly full strength with 5 regiments. Colonel Alfred Tolbert's New Jersey Brigade filled the gap between the Vermonters and Bartlett. The Federal line surged forward at 5:30 p.m., smashing the badly outnumbered Confederates and forcing them into headlong retreat towards Cramptons Gap. We are now going to turn onto Arnoldtown Road, which was and is the second route you can take to arrive at the summit of South Mountain and Cramptons Gap. As I rode up Arnoldtown Road, I tried to give you a perspective of just how steep the landscape is here by getting as close to the left side as I dared. Unfortunately, it's hard to get a good look at just how steep the incline is. But if you look at the area on the right side of the road, it may help to give you a better idea of the difficulty the Union troops faced in reaching the gap. I'm now going to read to you a small excerpt from the American Battlefield Trust's webpage on the battle at Cramptons Gap. Only about 1,000 Confederates defended Cramptons Gap, the southernmost of the South Mountain passes. At around 4 p.m., Major General Henry Slocum's division charged into the gap and dislodged the Confederates from the position of a stone fence. The arrival of 4 regiments under General Hal Cobb did little to stem the Union tide. Reinforced by a brigade of Vermonters, the Federals made a second attack and drove the remaining Confederates down the western slope of the South Mountain, leaving the 6th Corps in possession of Cramptons Gap. We're going to pause the ride here at the top of Cramptons Gap to mention a few interesting sites that don't relate to the battle that was fought here. The first and most obvious is the War Correspondents Memorial Arch. The War Correspondents Memorial Arch is a historic monument located at Gathland State Park, Maryland, United States. It was built in 1896 by Civil War correspondent George Alfred Townsend, also known as Gath, as a permanent memorial to newspaper correspondents, artists, and photographers who died during the American Civil War. The arch is inscribed with the names of 157 correspondents, artists, and photographers who lost their lives during the Civil War. The monument is now maintained by the National Park Service and is part of the Gathland State Park. It's also worthy to note that in 2003, 4 additional names were added to the monument. The second point of interest at Cramptons Gap is the fact that the Appalachian Trail passes right over the gap as it winds its way along the South Mountain Range. During the summer months, you may encounter some intrepid hikers who are attempting to complete the 2,190-mile walk from Georgia to Maine. Pictured here is Gaplin Hall, the former home of George Alfred Townsend, a renowned journalist and novelist who often wrote under the pen name of Gath. The home is now part of Gathland State Park, which is named in honor of its famous owner. After the Union's successful charge up the slope at Cramptons Gap, the badly outnumbered Confederates were forced to retreat down the west side of South Mountain to rejoin the main body of McLaws' corps. At this point, McLaws hastily formed a line at the south end of Pleasant Valley. In reality, McLaws was in a very bad position. He was trapped with his back against the Potomac River and was facing a numerically superior force. But after much delay, instead of attacking McLaws, Franklin turned north and headed for Sharpsburg, sealing the fate of Harper's Ferry and freeing Stonewall Jackson to rejoin Lee in time for the Battle of Antietam. The following is an excerpt from General McLaws' battle report. On the 15th, the enemy did not advance, nor did they offer any opposition to the troops taking position across the valley. The line to impose them from that direction was therefore formed, and the artillery posted to the best advantage. Our artillery on Maryland Heights firing on the enemies below as so soon as light permitted. The enemy showing no disposition to advance, I left command to General Anderson with directions to push the train across the river as fast as possible and follow with the infantry when the trains were well over. I then rode over and received orders to proceed to Sharpsburg with all possible dispatch. I returned to Pleasant Valley, and as the troops began gradually withdrawing, I formed a new line across the foot of the valley, still holding Maryland Heights and Weaverton Pass, and waited until nearly 2 o'clock when the trains, having passed over the river, the troops were withdrawn to the right bank and marching through Harper's Ferry and camped near Halltown, 4 miles distant, at about 8 o'clock on the 16th.